Hola a todos, yo soy Edu. El gobierno de Estados Unidos acaba de entrar de lleno a la era de las finanzas digitales, dando así el comienzo a una nueva era. Trump acaba de firmar la ley GENIUS, la cual sienta las bases y legaliza la creación del dólar digital a monedas estables con paridad dólar. Con esto se viene la adopción masiva de criptomonedas y es la primera piedra para convertir a Estados Unidos en la capital cripto del mundo. Antes de continuar, te invito a que te suscribas a este canal para que nadie se pierda las últimas noticias del mundo de las criptomonedas. Dale like y comparte. Bo Hines, el director ejecutivo del Consejo Presidencial de Asesores para Activos Digitales, dice: el presidente Trump acaba de promulgar la Ley GENIUS, una legislación histórica que revolucionará el sistema financiero global. Bajo este presidente, Estados Unidos lidera. Donald Trump dice: prometí que recuperaríamos la libertad y el liderazgo estadounidense y convertiríamos a Estados Unidos en la capital mundial de las criptomonedas. La ley GENIUS crea un marco regulatorio claro y simple para establecer y liberar la inmensa promesa de las monedas estables, respaldadas por dólares.
This afternoon, we take a giant step to cement American dominance of global finance and crypto technology as we sign the landmark Genius Act. I pledged that we would bring back American liberty and leadership and make the United States the crypto capital of the world, and that's what we've done. The Genius Act creates a clear and simple regulatory framework to establish and unleash the immense promise of dollar-backed stable coins.
This Genius Act will unlock American dominance in the crypto industry by creating clear rules of the road. It will update archaic payment rails with a revolutionary new payment system, and it will extend U.S. dollar dominance, like you said, globally. This is a huge promise made and promise kept by President Trump. We have a deal maker in chief, and it's because of your vision, your leadership, your determination, your skill that we're all here today. So thank you very much, President Trump.
With today's signing, the future of crypto and the crypto industry, the U.S. dollar working together is going to be stronger and bigger and better than ever before. And thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you.
David Sachs, el zar de la inteligencia artificial y las criptomonedas de la Casa Blanca, dice que se obtuvieron dos grandes victorias para las criptomonedas en la Cámara de Representantes, y en específico la ley Clarity, que se aprueba con 294 votos a favor y 134 en contra, demostrando un claro apoyo bipartidista. ¿Pero qué es la ley Clarity? Aquí hay 5 puntos principales. La CFTC regula las transacciones de materias primas digitales, los intercambios y los corredores. Número 2. Establece criterios de la madurez de la blockchain para la elegibilidad comercial. 3. Exime a ciertos activos digitales del registro en la SEC. 4. Otorga a la SEC la supervisión de actividades específicas de los corredores. Y 5. Hace cumplir las normas contra el lavado de dinero. Y el gran beneficiado con esta ley GENIUS es Ethereum, que ha visto incrementado su valor en casi un 50% en este último mes. Aquí Tom Lee, cofundador de BitMine, nos explica la gran importancia y relevancia que tiene Ethereum en el futuro de la blockchain y las criptomonedas.
What we should expect next?
Well, I think Ethereum, is a chain that I think is getting a second look. I know that there have been criticisms of it in the past because of either how layer 2s and layer 1s interact or just really sort of progress and upgrades to the network. But to us, I think the real thing we have to recognize as we look at what's happening in the real world is that Wall Street is converging onto crypto, and they're choosing to do a lot of this work on Ethereum because stablecoins have completely changed Wall Street's mind about how useful crypto can be. You know, as we've said, the stablecoins have created the chat GPT moment for crypto because we're seeing consumers really use it in a viral way. Merchants are beginning to really love it, especially outside the US. And now banks are realizing it's actually a decent business model. We just saw Citigroup even just say that they're looking at creating a stablecoin, even if it's just to manage deposit base, but still it is really Wall Street converging onto crypto. And at the end of the day, a couple things are going to be important. You know, Wall Street wants to find a chain that's operating compliantly in the US, and they want to find a big one, and where there's already a lot of real world assets, you know, tied up and on the layer one. And that's why Ethereum, we think, is going to become extremely relevant over the next decade.
Well, you mentioned some of the, I guess, critiques that Ethereum has faced in recent history, and I want to talk a little bit about those. You know, two of them is that, you know, Ethereum has become a little bit slower, a little bit more expensive, and as more Wall Street giants start looking at how to interact on the chain, do you think that Ethereum can keep up?
Yes, and they just have to create the right incentives, you know, between the layer twos and layer ones, and make sure there's just not too much gas out there, and that we can absorb that supply. But I think that's where, you know, these treasury companies are playing a pretty important role, and they're earning money staking. And I think the reality is that if there is a rejuvenation of interest around any token or any token platform, it also rejuvenates people's creativity and interest in making it more usable. So to us, this ChatGPT moment, which is converging around Ethereum, I think is going to also help unleash a wave of innovation. It's no different than when ChatGPT first swept across Silicon Valley, and this is after everybody had invested decades on SaaS. But guess what? Now there's many venture-funded businesses around using AI and ChatGPT that are exploding and getting to $100 million run rate so quickly. Well, I think that's what's going to happen in crypto. I think this is a really big moment for the industry to realize that as Wall Street converges and they're bringing a lot of interest and bringing a lot of new users and a lot of new applications, that this could transform actually the importance of smart contracts and Ethereum. So I think Ethereum's sort of, you know, dominance could actually grow dramatically.
Everyone's talking about price this week. You know, I think last I looked, ETH was up over 10%. What's your price target for ETH as we head into the second half of the year?
Our price objectives at Fundstrat. So I wear a couple of hats. You know, I'm the chairman of BitMine, but I'm also the head of research at Fundstrat. And actually I have a third role, which is the CIO of Fundstrat Capital. But at Fundstrat, Sean Farrell is the head of digital assets research, and he's given me some informal sort of targets. One way he thinks of this is that if we look at Circle and its free cash multiple, which now is like 130 times EBITDA, on an equivalent basis, Ethereum's closer to 15,000. And that makes sense. I think the layer one, as you know, as you get into layer one, you should apply a higher multiple to like sort of theoretical usage, because it's the same reason software companies get higher multiples than retailers, right? The more you're getting away from the customer and the more it's pure signal, you apply higher multiples to that business. And so I think in the near term, our technical strategist Mark Newton thought we could be seeing 4,000 before the end of the month for Ethereum, but that's not where it peaks. He just thinks that that's the first target. And then I think something, you know, if Sean Farrell's math is correct, you know, then I think 10 to 15,000 actually makes sense too.
By the end of the year?
It could be end of year, it could be sooner. I mean, it just really depends. But that, and again, that wouldn't be the cap, but that just shows you that's really a level above 5,000, it would be a decisive, all-time breakout for Ethereum. So I think that's a significant level to watch as well.
I want you to put your BitMine hat on for just a second. I know I mentioned at the top of the interview, you're the chairman of the board there. And BitMine has really taken on the Ethereum treasury strategy. I was going to say following in SharpLink's footsteps, but I imagine you're probably building up the strategy for this around the same time. Talk to me a little bit about BitMine's playbook when it comes to the Ethereum corporate treasury.
A lot of what our strategy has been disclosed in our press releases, so I'm glad to talk a lot about it. But to us, that at the core is our belief that Ethereum is dramatically undervalued as a token. That, and for the reasons I described, that crypto is seeing its ChatGPT moment, and really the second order beneficiary there is Ethereum. And so acquiring an asset that can appreciate by 10 times or more is a really good use of a treasury. In fact, MicroStrategy, when they began their treasury strategy, Bitcoin was 11,000, and it's 120,000 today. And so I think that's foremost where we're coming from. And some people say, well, why don't you just buy Ethereum outright? Well, an Ethereum treasury company can actually increase your ETH holdings per share by taking advantage of capital markets and volatility to raise capital. And they can also earn money from staking. And for instance, BitMine initially funded with $250 million of ETH, and that was closed on July 9th or July 8th. And then 3 days later, BitMine increased the treasury holdings by an additional $250 million. So in just 3 days, doubled the amount of treasury holdings, and that was as of Friday last week. So you can see that there is an advantage to a treasury company, because what you thought you had was of ETH relative per share just doubled in 3 days based on just the company acquiring more ETH. And of course, that activity continues. So I think that there's an advantage to owning a treasury company that is using capital markets to increase your ETH holdings per share.
I mentioned SharpLink there. We covered that news on this show earlier this week. They've come out and said that most of the ETH that they're holding is being staked. Is that true for BitMine?
Well, I think we haven't disclosed exactly the plans for how ETH is going to be. The ETH is actually being held today in Treasury, but whether or not it's going to be done through direct staking or using liquid tokens, that hasn't been disclosed yet. So I would say you should just stay tuned.
For investors who have already maybe allocated into Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ETF, or a Bitcoin treasury company, and are now looking at similar products for ETH, how would you explain the differences? Because ETH is a little bit more of a complicated story, right? So if you were talking to an investor, how would you differentiate between the two?
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to kind of have some framework in mind. We're still adamant fans of Bitcoin, because to me, Bitcoin is, first of all, it is really the ultimate form of trust at the moment, and it is digital gold in an easy way. And if someone says, well, what does that make it worth? Gold's 22 trillion network value, so Bitcoin should be worth $1 million. And there's plenty of future businesses that can be built around Bitcoin because of its stability. Ethereum is a smart contract enabled platform, and so it is unique because you can actually store real things onto the blockchain, whether you use layer 1 or layer 2. And I think maybe the real killer app, and this is what stablecoins are showing, is that as we move into a world of like AI, and we're trying to create units of pricing and to simplify the movement of goods, and things, simple examples of like tokenizing things from the real world onto a blockchain, you couldn't do it really on Bitcoin, because that's not what Bitcoin's designed to do. So I think as you're thinking of Wall Street converging onto crypto, and then AI innovations taking place and the idea of using even tokens or stable coins around that, well, then that's really when it comes to saying, well, Ethereum really is the largest smart contract platform in terms of network value. And that's what makes it attractive.
Now we're sitting in July. I know that you've said it's the best month of the year and the first year of a presidential term. If we think about that through a crypto lens, talk to me about where we are and where we're heading.
Well, yeah, it's I generally agree with people who say crypto responds to global liquidity, and so if central banks are easing, then we should see it in crypto prices first. And that's why crypto actually is a leading indicator for the stock market. And the fact that Bitcoin broke out to all-time highs is actually bullish for the S&P. But the interesting thing is that crypto is still not that widely held. So I think that, Bitwise has a great stat. They say 95% of Bitcoin's been mined, and, only 95% of the traditional finance world doesn't own Bitcoin. So there's a real mismatch. And so I think Bitcoin continues to be the leading crypto asset to watch. But to us, as risk appetite recovers, Ethereum and small caps are pretty highly correlated. And I think that that's why Ethereum, in percentage terms, has more upside for the next few years.
Now we're wrapping up the week here. We've been talking all about crypto. It's crypto week in Congress. There are 3 bills on the docket. Talk to me. Most are saying that these 3 bills are going to get signed. Whether that happens by the end of the week or a little bit later, I think is still up in the air given recent events in Congress. But is the signing of these bills priced in, do you think? And if they don't get signed, how do you think that's going to reflect in the markets?
Well, there's always going to be an initial reaction, but then, the long-term reaction. I think, nobody can really ever correctly predict how Washington, what path it chooses and what bills pass. But I think the reality is that crypto regulation is vastly improved over what we saw for the last 8 years and 12 years. And so I don't think anyone should be too discouraged by developments in Washington, but they should, of course, watch it closely. And then keep in mind that you can always have some things fixed through either reintroducing items or executive orders. So I wouldn't read too much into whatever happens out of Washington.
Is there anything that you've been closely watching this week that I haven't asked you about? I know Bitcoin and ETH have been the real standouts in the headlines, but is there anything that you've been watching that you wish someone would ask you about, or that you think is quite interesting that not enough people are talking about?
Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to earning. We're in the middle of earnings seasons, and financials start to report in earnest. This week and next week, but there have been a lot of comments from these financials about stablecoins, and stablecoins are frenemies for the financial industry. So I think that's just something people have to watch out for, because they are both a opportunity, but it's also a threat to their legacy business. So you have to keep in mind that in some ways, the financial industry is one of the strongest and savviest lobbying groups, that they have a role in how crypto regulations can pivot in either direction.
It's so interesting that you bring up this term frenemy, because I think in a lot of the conversations I've had, they've been very positive. It seems like institutions, Wall Streets, are really coming around to stablecoins, but you bring up a really good point there that it does kind of threaten traditional financial systems, what's already been built. What is the, I guess, enemy side of that? What is there anything that we should be watching out for when it comes to the adoption of stablecoins from the traditional financial sector?
Well, I mean, I can give a simple analogy, and then we can think about how it applies to the financial sector. But let's take social media and Facebook. And let's say Facebook was the cash cow for Facebook, which it is for Meta. But then came along Instagram, which was a very different way for people to interact. And then TikTok came along. And as you know, TikTok completely caught Meta by surprise. And if Meta had only invested in Facebook, the company would be a dwindling business. But they, of course, correctly made the pivot both to WhatsApp, Instagram, and then to TikTok, with Reels, etc. Well, in financial terms, the banking industry has not necessarily been that quick to recognize that an increasingly digital world means money is increasingly purely digital, and it's actually breaking barriers, And then if we look at the next iteration, it probably blurs what is the definition of money. We've already seen that blurring with loyalty points, etc. And so banks make a lot of money from traditional financial systems. It's 4% of global GDP is earned by the banking system. And whether you look at interchange, Visa earns 2 to 3% for being in the middle of a merchant transaction. These numbers drop dramatically in a digital world where trust is established through the actual blockchain itself. So that's what we have to realize is what is like the TikTok moment for Facebook.
En conclusión, a partir de ahora el mundo ya no será como antes. Estamos ante un cambio de era. Estamos de lleno en la era de las finanzas digitales. Bitcoin y Ethereum sentarán las bases de esta nueva era digital.
Dime qué opinas en los comentarios y no olvides darle like y suscribirte. Gracias, Rogers. Nos vemos en el próximo episodio.